Hi there. At a literary con this past week in Iceland, George R. R. Martin made an offhand mention that some of the potential Game of Thrones spin-offs HBO is considering include sequel ideas. And of course, the clickbaiters had to hype this up for all it's worth. I'll break this down, and the one idea I think Martin might have actually meant by that, which isn't exactly the same thing. Right before House of the Dragon premiered in 2022, James Hibbard of The Hollywood Reporter posted what he said was a leak of a Jon Snow sequel that was in development. This gets the rage surging through me that how irresponsible he was, because as it turns out, he only meant in development in the loosest, most facile way possible. That HBO had approached Kit Harington to discuss, hey, would you be open to doing that? Maybe try to brainstorm some worthwhile ideas with screenwriters. It was a set of brainstorming sessions, nothing formal, not a coherent pitch document. There is a format to a formal pitch document. It wasn't even a pitch technically, it was brainstorming sessions, and ultimately Harington himself decided to stop because they really couldn't come up with any ideas he felt were worth doing. So, not only did Hibbard jumping the gun misrepresent all of that, but he didn't consider the wider ripple effects that making that kind of claim has on basically all the tabloids. That's what a lot of this has been reduced to online with clickbait, that the mere possibility of a Jon Snow sequel opened the floodgates. So that to this day, every shit-eating AI-generated clickbait channel on YouTube, not individual people who I disagree with, I mean the literal AI channels, which are outproducing us by an exponential factor, not even humans. The clickbait AI-generated content with fake artwork is posting false trailers for Jon Snow sequels on a literally daily basis, claiming it's still an active project. They might even have done that if Hibbard hadn't done anything, because they still go for Arya or Sansa or anything. In development means that at least a writer is attached. Even then, that's not the same thing as greenlit to film a pilot, or much less greenlit to active filming on a full season. So the Jon Snow brainstorming debacle led to a textbook case of how not to responsibly handle leaks like that. Let me spell out the obvious. Not from season 8, but since season 5, when there was a giant controversy about Sansa and Dorne and Stannis, which the clickbaiters want people to forget, Game of Thrones abandoned the story of George R. R. Martin's books long before they ran out of material, not because they ran out of print stuff. How the hell can you claim that? I think the only people who say that know they're lying. But when they abandoned so much from the released 4th and 5th books, how can you say that? They cut out the Golden Company and John Connington. Some people really like that stuff. But also the Dorne stuff and Sansa, and they're all interconnected. You can't change one without changing the others. Even the Jon Snow stuff is affected by those things through ripple effects. That you can't explain what they did to Sansa or Dorne or Stannis in season 5 as due to lack of written material, or to the weird Arya chase stuff season 6 onwards. Those were not good Arya seasons. In retrospect, you can't blame that on lack of material. And the answer we came to is that Benioff and Weiss didn't just have a different vision than Martin's source material. Going back to season 1, they weren't even trying to make a coherent TV show. Well, they were trying to string us along through the first seasons, but as soon as The Red Wedding was a hit, so the next written season was season 5 due to overlap. From that point onward, it was not an attempt at making a coherent TV show, regardless of whether it's an adaptation. It's a sizzle reel of big moments for the lead actors to pander them for awards. Why else would so many people with no knowledge of the books think that even seasons 5 through 7, characters like Jon and Dany were doing incoherent things? In isolation from the books, they don't make sense, because they're a string of awards baiting scenes strung together. And why did they do that? You can time it. That same year they started winning these in 2015 is the year the Emmy Awards got rid of their blue ribbon panels. They relaxed the voting standards. They used to have committees whose job was to watch a full season to weed out potential nominees doing that kind of thing, where they'd let's have a random big assault scene on a woman that doesn't actually make sense in context. But if you put out, it's literally one scene that is meant to carry the entire season, where there is no setup. There used to be committees that weeded out shows trying to do that kind of thing, and as soon as they got rid of them, they lowered their voting standards to include things where the overall story doesn't make sense. But damn it, wasn't Olenna saying, "I want Cersei to know it was me," really cool, even though the Tyrells being easily defeated makes no sense? All of that. So they just wanted, particularly the leads, like Sansa, Jon, Dany, they need these big scenes for Emmy Awards. It isn't even television, is my point. It's not that it's different from the source material. This does not qualify as television. And so many knew what they were doing and didn't say anything. That they didn't do that, oh, you have to win awards for the sake of HBO. They bailed on HBO. They didn't do it for the sake of the actors. They did this to pad their resume before jumping to do Star Wars movies. What's worse to me, though, is that people are so, like the Matrix, the blue pills, the people so inured to the system that they can't shake. You can't fix this with a sequel. There were people in season 5 going, next season will retroactively fix this. You can't retroactively fix things on this scale. The people in the direct aftermath of season 8 clamoring for a season 9 to, well, it'll make up for that. How? How can so many people died that you can't undo the storylines of these characters? Or things that you can't undo that Daenerys has had this bizarre evil turn without explanation. And other things like that, the empty spectacle they put in. Hardhome does not happen in the books. It happens off screen. Battle of the Bastards probably also will not happen in the books at all. It is fan fiction. Let's have Robb Stark fight Joffrey. I mean, let's have Jon Snow personally fight Ramsay in this big battle that's won without plot logic. These don't even happen. They're not part of the show. Battle of the Bastards won't happen any more than Ellaria killing Oberyn's brother to avenge Oberyn in the next book. That's silly. So the point of all this is, how and why should you even try to make coherent sequels to that? It's like, unless it's literally a time travel retcon proposal. The direct comparison I've made is to the X-Men movies after X-Men 3. No one was sitting around going, how do we make a sequel that follows up on these events from X-Men 3, as in accepting them? They were talking about sequels that would undo them, either through, but then it turns out the Phoenix is still alive, or in the case the way they actually did it, time travel to erase it. Either way, no one wanted to accept those events as part of an ongoing story. Direct comparison to X-Men 3 and X-Men Days of Future Past retconning it. Well, let's look at Martin's actual words here. He said, yeah, there's 5 to 6 projects HBO is considering. Among them, sequel ideas. First, I'm not even sure if he means that specifically or if he's just speaking loosely. Not taking into account that they had been. Is he taking into account that they were talking about the Jon Snow thing, but Kit Harington then later said it's deader than dead? I don't know. Was Dunk and Egg included in that count? When he says 5 or 6, let's assume not. Because when he goes all 5 or 6 ideas, I can already account for 5 or 6 active pitches that are not sequels. There's at most 5 or 6 ideas that we've heard of, at least. I mean, it might have changed behind the scenes, but we know there's 3 live-action pitches, 3 animated pitches. Live action includes Targaryen Conquest, an Nymeria TV series, and one that we're not sure if it's a theatrical movie, which I suspect is Robert's Rebellion. Then we have 3 animated, which is Young Corliss, Yi Ti, and maybe a Histories of Lore anthology. So there might not even have been a change in that number of pitches in the past 2 years up to whatever Martin is referring to. Does he mean active sequel pitches? Does he mean something with a writer attached? Like, the Kit Harington thing was never more than brainstorming, so what exact level of development is he referring to? Ideas they're shooting around the office? I wish he wouldn't if that's the case. That's very premature. Is he even using the present tense, or just there were 5 or 6, among them was this Jon Snow sequel? What does he mean by that? All of this has come up before, and the hype reporters, of course, need to play the telephone game and spin this into the headlines barraging your newsfeed. Full-scale sequel show actively greenlit, when it might just be brainstorming a character piece, or Martin misspoke. We don't know. Even if they did make it, Martin himself would not make a sequel to a story that diverged so much from his own. It would only be a sequel to Benioff and Westeros, not George R. R. Martin's Westeros. So why the hell would you care? Why would you care? It's not even the real story. And yes, there is a difference, but when you're that far into we're not even making a TV show, it is awards bait for actors. There is no coherent TV Arya. There is no TV Jon Snow. There is no TV Daenerys anymore. I think there can be for different franchises. This got so blatantly, we're just moving the actors around. It ceased to be a fictional story with its own internal logic. And I've actually seen clickbaiters just desperately going, please, I need to afford my protein powders so I can live as a social media influencer as a full-time job. Let's just randomly throw in some unused storylines that they didn't use already. Not how do we advance the story, but actually saying, well, why don't we combine the young Griff stuff with Sansa? Like Sansa facing young Griff. It wouldn't be the same story. It wouldn't be the story of young Griff from the book. And given that Sansa never meets him in the story, you're just mashing elements together. How is that coherent? And the elephant in the room is that talk of sequels always brings up how could Season 8 possibly have been what Martin intended. That is the elephant in the room that is all revolving around. Even the casual viewers feel that way. As for anyone aware, for those who feel the books exist, who know the books, we've been feeling since Season 5 onwards that this isn't Martin's story. Beyond vague fragments mished and mashed around for the sake of actor favoritism and awards pandering. We talked about this before, it flares up every few months. I've made specific videos on this in more detail, but I promise that there was one idea. I did say at the beginning there was one idea that Martin might have been referring to that could have aspects to a sequel. That is the only thing I can think of, and this is what I want you to focus on from this video. Martin made some blog posts 2 years ago about how he's developing a stage play about the Great Tourney at Harrenhal, which was the starting event that sparked off Robert's Rebellion. Around the same time, he cryptically mentioned hoping he got to work with Maisie Williams on something that he wasn't allowed to talk about, if things worked out. Then in early 2024, HBO said they were in very early discussions on a Game of Thrones theatrical movie, which quite separately I said, well, through process of elimination, I think if they only do one movie, it would be Robert's Rebellion, because it's something that has to appeal to a mainstream audience. They wouldn't know what Blackfire Rebellion was. So I already made a whole video about this, I'll link to it. Putting 2 and 2 together months ago, year ago, my speculation was that they want to make a Robert's Rebellion movie, maybe even trilogy, and that they want Maisie Williams to return as Arya as basically a framing device. So parts of this you could say are a sequel in that there's a framing device that technically takes place after Game of Thrones ended. Like literally just start with a dock, show Arya coming back, and then she travels to Harrenhal. Then as she's looking around asking questions, she doesn't affect the plot in any way. She's literally just there to be a framing device going, that's what my Aunt Lyanna did. Things like that. No more than a framing device that is technically in the future. I think they might have been considering. And it would be so vaguely related to the actual plot of what happened to Game of Thrones, they might not even mention it. Like, when we look at Marvel things today, like Blade the Vampire Hunter showing up in Deadpool and Wolverine, there is discussion, is this technically the Blade? Is it a variant of Blade who had a similar, almost exactly the same, but not quite story? With a multiverse, it gets confusing. But you can say, well, is it necessarily the Arya or a Arya played by Maisie Williams? Because they might imply that the story is different. I don't know. So the one thing I can think of that Martin might be referring to that was chronologically later is like an Arya framing device. Or he was speaking loosely. Or I might be wrong and they might have pitched another sequel to something else. And even then, just because Martin said they pitched it doesn't mean... Or they could be brainstorming. He might mention I'm arguing with them not to do this, and something is only real when it has a writer attached. Really. That we know they've discussed crazy ideas, and then the clickbaiters turn them into real ideas. They don't... I used to be so naive that I thought that people actually believe this, particularly because of the way the internet developed. It's now AI channels and clickbaiters are just looking for headlines that... Frankly, that's even what the news channels were during the run of Game of Thrones. It's not about truth. It's about how do we make an exciting title, an exciting headline. We have had our hands full this year, dealing with House of the Dragon Season 2 controversy and work backlogs, and everyone in their own life dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic, the job situation for everyone. Some other people have had worse years than I have in the past 3 years. And just everything going on, but particularly the House of the Dragon Season 2 controversy. The clickbait channels and literally nothing but AI-generated slop channels. And you know who they are. The clickbaiters may have mistaken our preoccupation with indifference or incapability. But 2026 is going to be when things turn around again. 2 Westeros shows in a single calendar year. Season 3 of House of the Dragon shaping up to be a lot better. That'll get us back on our feet, because it is easy for the manosphere types and the clickbaiters to hit us when we're down, when view counts are down, because they are off criticizing other things too. Once we're back on our feet after a really full year of content, we will be getting our house into order. The free lunch is over. Well, if you've been listening this long, undoubtedly the AI slop channels are going to try to barrage you with auto-generated content now about Jon Snow sequels or Arya sequels, just regurgitating Google search text results back at you. You know, they don't do Bran sequels as much, even though logically that would be something that affects it more. I don't think Bran is king in the books. I think he's king of Winterfell, but they push Jon and Arya more because they're more popular characters, not because it's something a show would have a reason to focus on. That, yes, for a couple of days at least, you're going to see the slop channels pushing... You'll see title cards in your news feed of Jon Snow sequel, Arya sequel. Keep a list of who's doing that. We need to start cracking heads. In a metaphorical sense. But but it's just... I don't think that kind of content gets people to actually subscribe to channels. It's meant to trick people into watching a channel once. And then you never watch them again. And they've hit the saturation point. People eventually know what the AI channels are. And I hope that because I'm actually here making detailed filming reports and state of the industry reports, I end up getting repeat viewers who come back. That's how the subscription-based model works, that not as many people will be tricked into watching my videos, but those who do are repeat customers. At least I hope. So I hope that you'll actually subscribe to my channel and stick around for future updates, given all these filming reports and state of the industry reports I've been giving on all of this researched content and not clickbait.